Hi, this is Mikkel from Sync. In the next 5 minutes, I will introduce you to the Sync MCP for data quality. And we'll do that through a demo project and show you hands-on workflows of how you can actually use this in practice. Just before we start, a little theory here on the slide around MCPs in general and what the MCP from Sync does. So you can think about MCPs as something you interact with through AI tools like Claude Desktop, Cursor, Claude Code, OpenAI, or any other AI tool that has a built-in LLM. What the MCP does, it lets the LLM connect to specific APIs or specific tools related to, in our case, data quality. That means you can start asking the LLM specific things around what is the impact of making a change to this column, or what are potential root causes, and it can then go in and actually use the specific tools available to Sync. So we'll see much more about that in practice. What we have as well is a data set around New York City taxi rides. You can see that we have a set of data models, we have some airflow tasks, and a lot of different DBT tests, and that's what we'll be asking some questions on that you can imagine you would be doing in real life. So to get started, let's bring up Claude Desktop. This is a AI tool where you can ask questions, and this is connected to the Sync MCP in the background. So just starting out simple, let's ask which assets are in the Sync project. This then goes off and connects to the MCP and understands what specific assets that there are. So you can see that it extracts things like tables and models across different layers, but it actually also goes beyond that, and it looks at things like anomaly monitors, data quality test and DBT, and a few other things. So that's kind of useful for understanding this can actually look into our database and into our models. For this specific example, I'm just going to look at a specific model called New York City taxi rides. As you can see, this has a lot of information around taxi rides, fares, trip amounts, and it has also a bunch of upstream tables that we also care about. So one simple example could be just understanding what are the data sources upstream of this data model. So again, we ask this question, and you can then see that what the LLM does, it actually connects to these relevant tools that we showed in Sync, and then it tries to fetch what are the upstream dependencies. And at a glance, this might look like a very simple ask, but if you imagine that we start thinking about adding tests or understanding root causes, this is a very useful tool to have available. So this, you can sort of see that the model understands the full lineage, it's able to extract sources, it's able to extract staging models, and finally it can understand that that's how the model is composed. Moving on to the testing part of this, let's actually put this into something that's useful. So let's ask, are there any sources upstream of that are untested? And you can imagine this is kind of a useful thing already, because this is an important data model, and I want to understand if some of these data sources are not tested and in fact should be tested. So it now executes a bunch of requests, and actually while it does that, we can look at what happens under the hood, and you can actually see that what this MCP does, it has a request, which is an input. In this case, it's just the table identifier, and then it gives a response, which can be the specific source and the specific test and checks. You can actually see here now, it identifies a critical gaps. So one source is called taxi zone lookup. That's completely untested. And it even goes in and says why it's important and how it's used. It also identifies sources that are only tested minimally, and it says specific things that could be missing. One thing that's important here that we recommend is you can actually provide context around your specific scenario. So if, for instance, you prefer using anomaly monitors over hard-coded DBT freshness tests, you can have that be recommended. You can see here it's identified a bunch of gaps. So let's just ask that if it has any recommendations for tests to add. So you can already see here it's got the full context, and it now understands that here are specific things we could test for. And what I always recommend that you do here is you actually use your specific understanding of the domain to go in and edit or delete or accept these, but don't take them at face value. All right, so now you've already seen how this is useful at understanding your data assets through the Discovery API. It's also helpful for understanding how they connect and what the tests are. And let's actually go in now and look at a live issue. So within Sync, we have this Health tab. It shows all your different monitors across DBT, SQL Mesh, Sync anomaly monitors. And something that jumps out is that we got a few issues over here. And more specifically, you can see that one of our vendors, their revenue growth has significantly dropped. So let's just look at this one here. You can see it usually has hundreds of thousands of values, and now it's dropped to 0. So clearly something has gone wrong. So let's just copy the name here and ask it to give potential root causes for this issue, and we let that run. And now you can actually follow the steps that the LLM does as well, which are not too dissimilar from what you would do as a data engineer or analytics engineer. It looks at the issue detail, it looks at the history of issues, it looks at specific code, it looks at upstream dependencies, it might even look at recent code changes, recent commits, schema changes, and all that information. And then it analyzes what it thinks is the most plausible root cause. You can see here it correctly sums up that the revenue has dropped to 0, which is unexpected. We can actually also see that our solutions engineer and field CTO Stephen Murphy is looking into this. And then the smoking gun in this case, it's actually a deliberate code change that was introduced to create an anomaly. So maybe an easier one to detect, but it still goes to show that this fully understands everything that you might do as a data engineer. If you recall the data model we had before, the New York City taxi, if we just jump back to that. So let's say we want to make a change to the vendor name and how that's calculated. That's not an uncommon workflow either. So jumping back to the LLM, so what's the so let's ask what is actually the downstream impact of making a change to this column. And what you'd often do here if you were not using an LLM might be that you might look in your lineage, you might try to zoom in and see if important dashboards or important columns are impacted. But this can actually give you a much broader set of information and knowledge. So you can now see that the specific vendor name is used downstream in 9 DBT models. It's also used in external systems, and there's actually tests and monitors that depend on it as well. And you can also see that it gives you this breakdown specifically of what might break. And this is already super useful for you to not introduce breaking changes. The last thing I wanted to show you today is now let's say you are on a data roller, so you're responsible for managing data issues for the week, and now you're going on weekend and you hand over to another person. So Let's create a handover report. So this is something you could imagine giving to a colleague that might not have the full context of what happened during that week. There's a summary of all ongoing issues broken down by severity, even issues that are more than 30 days old, and a very clear idea around what are the specific issue IDs, who's the owner, what's the status. And you can now think about that you can combine this with other AI workflows, copy this ID in, get the root causes, and so forth. So these are just a few of the different workflows you can use the Sync MCP for. It's already live with our first customers, and all these workflows, they will also work on your data stack.